Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today, I'd like to talk about a new book that was just published this week, and that's Water, Water, Poems by Billy Collins. This new collection was just published on November 19th by Random House. I have spoken about Billy Collins on the channel before. I know I've devoted at least one episode of Poetry Thursday to his work, but I wanted to talk about him today in order to celebrate the release of this new book. Now in his 80s, Billy Collins has published 12 volumes of poetry. And he's also edited 3 anthologies. Billy Collins was the U.S. Poet Laureate from 2001 through 2003. And he was also the New York State Poet from 2004 through 2006. He was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters in 2016. He is generally considered one of America's favorite poets. He is most certainly one of my favorites. He writes in a clear, accessible style, often with great humor as well. And this accessible style made him a wonderful poet to teach to high school students. And I also had the great fortune of hearing Billy Collins read in person on 3 occasions. And on 2 of those occasions, I brought groups of students to hear him read as well at the Dodge Poetry Festival. Writing about everyday life. Billy Collins brings to the ordinary quite often a sense of the extraordinary and a sense of mystery. In this collection, his newest collection, I also sense the presence of the theme of aging with perhaps a heightened awareness of the poet's mortality. And I think you might hear some of that in a few of the poems that I'm going to read. I'd just like to read a few of my favorites from this collection. The first poem that I'm going to read, excuse me, the first poem is entitled When a Man Loves Something. When a man loves something. Late one night at a roadhouse a little down from where I lived on the edge of a California desert, I happened to hear Percy Sledge live. I remember his voice rising to such heights of conviction that night. I felt lucky to have spotted his name on the lit-up yellow sign outside. As I listened over my drink, I silently wished him well and extended that wish to Mrs. Sledge and all the little Sledges, if there happened to be any around. Years later, when I lived in Florida, we had a plumber whose name was Lynn Hammer. I like to introduce people to one another, but Lynn Hammer said he had never heard of Percy Sledge and put his head back under the sink. So many miscues like that these days, as when I remarked in a store that featured fancy pastries, "This isn't your grandmother's coffee shop," and the girl glanced up at me as if I were from another planet, which, of course, I was. If the past can be added to the ones already orbiting the sun, including our small blue one, which is carrying you and me and everyone else, along with the singer and the plumber, the barista, and yes, maybe even her grandmother, in a big oval somewhere in the icy immensity of space. Next, I'd like to read Anniversary. The moment I turned a corner into a quiet side street in an unfamiliar city, I ran into the realization that you had died exactly 9 years ago today, which led me to envision a baby who was born on the same day you died, a boy who would grow up but always be the same age as your death, and whose birthday parties under a tree on a lawn would be secret memorials to you, our own imaginary boy, like a breathing statue in a hidden corner of a park. This I decided as I leaned my bicycle against a tree somewhere in Philadelphia. And next, I'd like to read Emily Dickinson in Space. When we were very young, we heard an Emily Dickinson poem being recited by our teacher. Then we looked around the classroom at each other. Later, I graduated to reading one of her poems every morning before I rose from my bed with the dawn. Once in a famous library, I was allowed to hold a letter she'd written, and when no one was looking, I shook it a little, the way it might have trembled in her hand. Then it began to tremble in mine. Another time, and this is harder to believe, before giving a talk about her at a university in Rome, I was introduced by an Italian astronaut who spoke not from the podium, but from the orbiting space station, saying nice things about me as he floated on a big screen on holiday from gravity. Behind him, an oval window was radiant with the sun's spotless light. Then he read one of Emily's poems from a slip of paper in his hand. There is a solitude of space, a solitude of sea, a solitude of death, finite infinity. And when he waved goodbye, I waved back like a schoolboy from the front row of the auditorium in Trastevere, near the flowing Tiber. Then I stood up and gave my earthling talk. Afterward, a woman told me the astronaut was none other than Paolo Nespoli, who had spent an entire year in space and who was said to have been the final lover of the late Oriana Fallaci. Imagine that I said to myself, looking up at the evening sky, her little poem still circling the globe at 17,000 miles an hour. Hands down, the fastest poem in history, if such records were kept, passing over everything below, once every 93 minutes, including the Vatican and the Colosseum, not to mention the leafy canopy of Amherst, Massachusetts, and her small grave and headstone in the West Cemetery behind an iron fence just down an unpaved road. So that's a little bit from Billy Collins' new collection, Water, Water. As always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.